Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Pat Flynn. Today, I am joined by a new acquaintance of mine. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pat. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, so Matt, let's spend a little time on the formalities here. I know we're going to talk philosophy and the importance of educating Catholic youth, but give us a little background on yourself, good sir, if you don't mind. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? All
Glad
that.
Glad to do it. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm a high school physics teacher by trade. When I was in high school, just fell in love with physics, saw the beauty of it. Didn't know it at the time that I was seeing the beauty of it, but saw the beauty of it, and then majored in physics in college, had kind of a conversion process, but in the Protestant world. I had been raised going to the Catholic Church, but nothing had ever sunk in, and started this relationship with Christ. And then towards the end of college, encountered some Catholics. Actually, was emailed by a Catholic guy named Trent Beatty, who now he does some writing, he does interviews, sports interviews, stuff like that. And we started debating, and I tried to disprove Catholicism. And in the process, over the course of a few years, and after encounters with Peter Kraft, and then starting to read, coming to understand Catholicism, because at first I was really anti-Catholic. And then came to a point where I couldn't deny it, came back to the Catholic faith. And my study of philosophy played a big role in that, because philosophy opened my mind up to thinking deeply, critically about the nature of the human person, the nature of God, learning to apply logical thought to these abstract questions. And so came to a place where I couldn't deny the truth of the Catholic faith anymore. And
so, Matt, let me just interject here, because this is always really interesting to me. I'm a Catholic revert, and I was leaning, when I first started to rediscover religion in general, I was leaning Protestant for a while. So I have a similar story to you. So I'm always fascinated to hear what was like the biggest thing for you, or the couple biggest objections that you felt you could not answer against Catholicism that eventually led to your conversion to it?
The things that really hit home for me was ultimately authority. I was, how could anyone say that, the Pope has authority or anything like that? But then it hit home at one point, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized I was saying sola scriptura, but why did I believe that? Like that, the thing that I was assuming to be the authority, I realized that was an assumption that I had. And when I reflected on it, I realized I didn't have a good reason for believing sola scriptura.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, isn't it? That's the one that I could never get around either. That's exactly. Yeah. It seemed to me that either has to be the Bible and the church, or neither.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then I looked at what Christ said, and he had given authority to the church through the Holy Spirit. Because that was the thing too. I thought, oh, it's the church; they're claiming the authority, but it's the church being given that authority from Christ through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So it's not a man-made thing; it's a God-inspired thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing stories like that. Now I have another one for you. So you're a physicist.
Physics teacher. Yeah, high school
physics teacher, yes. Yeah. Physics teacher. I'm not even that, so. but Catholicism obviously has a very rich, deep philosophical tradition. Yeah. Did that help you? Did having that philosophy help you make better sense of what you knew about the world from physics?
Yeah, philosophy has really helped me to kind of realize the boundaries of any discipline, let alone what physics has to say, what theology has to say, any of that stuff. Philosophy, and that's one of the downsides of people not knowing philosophy, is that it's really hard to make sense of what is the domain of science. What is it that science can tell us about? People say things like, well, science has disproven God, when the philosophy of science would tell us, well, that's not even in the realm of science.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, having the background in philosophy certainly helped me to be able to put everything in its proper place.
Now, so I mean, you weren't Catholic when you started your study of physics. You were still a Christian.
Yeah.
Was there ever really a tension there for you, or did you kind of see past that mirage from the beginning?
I think I somehow implicitly saw past it.
Mm-hmm.
In the Christian world where I was, it did have a tendency to be more conservative in its interpretation of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I had gone deeply into it enough yet to take a strong side one way or another.
Mm.
And I knew enough about physics at the time too to realize that there are a lot of things that are still very much uncertain. So that was my refuge at the time, kind of relying on the uncertainty of some of the things that physicists would claim or point to, or people who are anti-religious.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't taken a strong stance on any of those issues at the time.
Yeah, it's always just interesting to hear how those perspectives work for some people, and especially even as it changes. I know a number of people who were Protestant before, into the sciences, but then the Catholic foundations gave them a way to reconcile previous tensions, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like you struggled with that too much.
No. It all made more sense to me as I became Catholic. The things fit into place better. Learning to understand Scripture from the Catholic perspective, seeing some of the Catholic scientists who had really helped to found science in the first place.
Yeah, go figure, right?
Yeah. To get that habit of thought going, the whole idea, this experimental method, scientific method, and even right up to, Father George Lemaitre, who invented the Big Bang Theory. And they just renamed a law of physics after him.
Yeah, isn't it the Hubble-Lemaitre?
The Hubble-Lemaitre law.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Well-deserved, we should say.
That's right.
Yeah, well-deserved indeed. So that's very cool. That's good. So Matt, what then? Okay, so you moved. You came into the Catholic Church. Welcome home, by the way.
Yeah.
Even though it seems to have, you've been here for a little bit now. What aroused your interest in, because you have a degree in physics and philosophy as well, right? Were you a dual major, or did you pursue philosophy afterwards? What's the course there?
Yeah. So I finished the physics degree.
Mm-hmm.
I was at James Madison in Virginia, moved up to New Jersey, and actually did a year on staff with Crew, what was Campus Crusade for Christ at the time, with the sports ministry of that, Athletes in Action. Working with Rutgers University, a couple of the professional sports teams in the area as well. And my wife, at that point then, I was interested in philosophy. We had audited a course with Peter Kraft. I realized what philosophy was about, and I wanted to learn more. And
now, were you Catholic at this time or no?
Not Catholic. Not Catholic.
Okay,
actually,
got it.
Before meeting Kraft, vehemently anti-Catholic. I thought it was a heresy. Catholicism.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Met Kraft, and just a couple of conversations with him, he was able to correct my language, to point out some of the language differences, and I realized, okay, it's not necessarily a heresy after all. It's still not great, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I'm in the process of learning more.
Do you remember one of those conversations specifically?
Yeah.
Was there one that has really stuck with you with Kraft?
Yeah, we decided to audit the course because my in-laws are on staff with Athletes in Action. So my in-laws and my wife and I were auditing this class. We meet up with Kraft before class and ask if we can take him out to dinner. We take him out to dinner, and they were probably mortified, but I just pinned him to the wall and I said, look, you're Catholic. The Catholic Church teaches that we're not saved by faith, but we are saved by faith. How do you answer that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they were all like just turning red at the time.
And I'm sure he's never got that question before.
Yeah, I'm sure he's never got that. Absolutely. And I knew who he was because I had read the book Case for Faith, and he's interviewed in that book. I knew that he was a convert, and so I wanted to know his perspective. And he just pointed out the difference in language, the way that some people use the word faith, especially the way that we use the word saved. Like, does it mean merely forgiven of sins, or does it mean totally purified and sanctified?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, so there's some room here for the language, so I need to investigate some more. That was a big one.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, he was very influential for me. So very cool that you got to spend some time with him. So you got to study under him as well?
Well, we we spent that semester auditing the course
Mm-hmm.
with him, and it was the philosophy of Lewis and Tolkien. So you can imagine Craft teaching that class. It was just I just ate it up.
That's fantastic. I'm quite jealous.
It was good. And we'd meet up with him sometimes before class and play chess or get dinner or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to, pick his brain a little bit. So I was really turned on to philosophy at this point. Wanted to study some more. Took a job teaching at a private Christian high school, actually the high school that Craft graduated from here in northern Jersey.
Oh, wow.
And at that time then decided to start going to a local school and work on a bachelor's in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I was doing the bachelor's in philosophy while teaching math at the time at this private Christian school. And so it was actually the philosophy degree is a second bachelor's degree.
Yep.
And then, but not from a Christian or Catholic perspective.
Yeah, just from your
Secular.
yep.
Some of the professors were actually quite anti-religious, but
I believe that.
thankfully I had the foundation of what I had learned from Craft and Lewis and Chesterton, what I had picked up from Tolkien, these other guys. I was so well founded there with those ideas that the more I studied philosophy, even under these secular professors, the more I couldn't deny my faith, the more sense it made in the face of these other philosophies.
Yeah, that's funny. I had such a similar experience too, and I'm curious if yours was the same with mine. Is not only were they very anti-religious, but they didn't really have any good reasons to be. Yeah, same with you.
Yeah, and I found the professors themselves also to be unreliable. One professor, I'll never forget this, said in class, I think it was a metaphysics class, or maybe it was philosophy of religion, and he said that Plato's Timaeus, at one point in the Middle Ages, the church considered the Timaeus to be as authoritative as Scripture.
Yeah.
And at this point, I was very, very close to being convinced of Catholicism, if not totally convinced by this point. Mm-hmm. So I said to him after class, I said, "Professor, you said this." And I said, "That is really interesting to me. Do you have a source, someplace I could find out about that?" Mm-hmm. He thought about it for a second. He looked at me and said, "I lied."
Oh, wow. So he actually admitted the lie.
Wow. Yeah. Like he had said this in class and then privately to me, either remembered or realized and then confessed to me that he had lied.
Well, I mean, it's tremendous that he admitted it. I have a number of experiences in my undergrad as well, where just, trying to be polite and objecting to some claims the professors were making that were about as bold and as obviously wrong as that. But I never got any of them to admit they were lying. I just kind of got them to weasel away from it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's weird. I wonder. I've often tried to psychoanalyze it, or just to says like, is it just a culture of academia itself that makes them act this way? I don't understand what it is. But I was so surprised because I would think like, okay, I'm sure they'll have some good arguments against why theism is false or the religious worldview is absurd, and they just didn't. And in fact, they just didn't even seem to understand it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it was off their radar.
Yeah.
I wanted to, if I could have, I would have loved to take a class on medieval philosophy, Thomas Aquinas, something like that. None of the professors there were even qualified to do an independent study with me. I was disappointed. So let me tell you, I am so excited to be studying Thomistic philosophy at a Catholic graduate school. Like, it's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it.
So, it is good, I think, because it seems like for you, the same thing with me it's good to, you want to spend some time around people who can support you and strengthen you, this or that. But it was definitely useful for me to spend time, in secular academia where you're not getting that support and you're going to face the challenges and even if they wind up not being that challenging at all. But I felt like that time, and it sounds like you had a similar experience, actually really strengthened my faith and strengthened my convictions. Same thing with you?
Same here. Here.
Yeah. So, all right. So you graduate there, you're now teaching physics, you're doing your master's, and let's talk about what you're really doing now, which is authoring a number of books, and you just have a new one out. So what's your mission, Matt? What are you trying to do to well, let's start with your most recent book, which I have had the delight of reading about 1/3 of so far, but look forward to finishing. Okay. So tell us a little bit about that.
So this one, the style of it was really inspired by Kraft and Walker Percy.
Mm-hmm.
Walker Percy's book, Lost in the Cosmos, has a similar kind of feel. He doesn't have as many like different kinds of stories, but the idea is to use humor and story to kind of get inside and make these philosophical points.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I remember Kraft saying things like, humor is something that gets past the defenses.
Mm-hmm.
We have our defenses up as we have philosophical discussions, arguments, that type of thing, if you're talking about worldview with somebody who doesn't agree. But that's one of the reasons why humor can be so effective, is that it gets past that.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily all the stories are funny.
But I thought they were.
Thanks. Yeah. Actually, one of them...
So far. I haven't read all of them yet. So.
Yeah. One of them about being open-minded was just published in the National Catholic Register.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, I mean, it was that kind of thing. Like how abstract and even kind of weird can I make these stories,
mm-hmm.
but just to make these points about philosophy and about the way that we think about these things, to try to get past some of those defenses. And starting with some of these really crazy ideas like there is no truth, or truth is relative,
mm-hmm.
or we need to just be open-minded and accepting of every single idea. Taking that and kind of running with it. Well, if that was the case, then what would this really look like?
Yeah.
So these different realities, these guys sitting at a bar, like, are we in your reality or my reality?
Yeah. Well, what I love that you're doing with this project is you're kind of starting at ground zero and you're working all the way up.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start there. Let's just do a few examples. So when you were, planning this book out, I mean, that's really kind of the fundamental question right there, right? Is if we're going to have an argument about whether or not we can know truth, we have to talk about truth itself. So take us through that a little bit, Matt. What's the problem in today's society with truth, and how are you responding to it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if there is no truth, and this seems to be the idea, because now we live by our feelings. It's whatever we feel like. Like I define myself by how I feel. But you can't tell anybody if they're right or wrong. People have different truths. It's true for you. It's true for me, whatever that might mean. Everything we appeal to opinion. Oh, it's just your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that if there is no common reality, then even all of our communication falls apart.
Yeah.
There's no means of communicating with the other, right? We are just completely independent and isolated. So even our ability to communicate totally undermines our idea that there is no truth, that
mm-hmm.
there is no reality, and that we can know anything about it. That's the fundamental starting point.
Yeah, it's amazing how pervasive this pernicious notion is. I mean, I remember, being in college, one of my professors, and I'm not going to say all of them, but was one of my ethics professors. She was a strong form moral relativist. I mean, as strong as you can get of moral relativist. Like what you think would be a caricature of a moral relativist, that's what she was.
Yeah.
And passing that on to the students. So, I mean, of course, the only thing I could do was object the entire semester to pretty much everything she had to say. And the most amazing thing was, not to hijack the conversation, but I think you'll get a laugh out of this, is, she was such a strong form moral relativist that she says that, we should not only not impose values on people, but we shouldn't try to correct people. We shouldn't try to criticize them. We shouldn't try to blame them, praise them, anything at all.
Yeah.
But then almost immediately after she says that, she tries to ask me to quiet down in class and stop objecting so much. So,
right. Yeah.
So of course I turned that on her. I'm like, are you trying to criticize me or instruct my behavior or this or that? And it was amazing how many mental gymnastics she tried to perform to get out of that. And like, she clearly saw that she was in deep contradiction, yet just still went on with that worldview. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's part of the title of the book, actually, The Wise Guy and the Fool.
Mm-hmm.
this idea that some people are so intelligent and so creative that they can perform the mental gymnastics to believe these really crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
That really, in order to be a good philosopher, you've got to be, quotes, foolish enough to be able to just look at reality and see it, just to experience and participate in reality as it is. You know, I remember Kraft would talk about ideas so crazy that only someone with a PhD could believe them.
It's so true, man. It's so, I mean, that is your typical, if you're going to get a philosophy degree in probably most secular universities, that's pretty much the story.
Yeah.
Right there. Oh man. It is. And what I love about what you're doing is so important is it's just kind of like returning people to common sense, which amazingly has been so lost over the years. So keep us going, Matt. What are some other obstacles you're trying to help people overcome in this book?
Yeah. And then, you know, like the next chapter, or the second chapter, is this idea of illusions, because sometimes people say, well, what if there's an illusion and I don't see things the right way? Like, how do I know I'm not just experiencing an illusion? I'm like, well, then what we have to do is we have to check ourselves. You know, if we think that we're making mistakes, then we call in other people. That's why philosophy is a community effort. That idea too, and that the whole idea of mistakes and illusions implies that there is in fact a reality. If
Yes.
it's wrong, then that means that there must be something right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was always the problem with kind of Kant's view of the world, right? It's like, okay, if everything's just an impression,
right,
well, what are you comparing that impression to, and how do you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's amazing, you know. And I know that you're a fan of Adler. Have you read Adler's 10 Philosophical Mistakes?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
And I tried to pull from that book, especially when I was writing this book.
Yeah, I got a notice of that, and you do a great job with that. But it's because a lot of what you're doing, and I think what he did, which is so important, is just showing kind of, yeah, those what might have been small little mistakes or deviations that have led to pretty significant and disastrous effects in how people think today, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, man. And it's like, okay, maybe it didn't start off with people being just going from the common sense view to strong form moral relativist. There were a few, you know, smaller deviations along the way, but they were significant enough that, well, now here we are, right?
Yep. Right. Yeah.
So now we have you trying to right this massive ship.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm not alone, because that would not go well if it was just me.
So we'll make sure by the end here that people know where they can get that book. But the other thing I want to make sure that we fit in here, Matt, before our time is up, is something I know that you told me you're very passionate about, which I am passionate about too. I'm not a teacher like you in an official sense, but I do teach Sunday school at least, and the importance of educating our youth and our Catholic youth. So talk to me about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I, started investigating Catholicism and became Catholic, I was blown away by the depth and the beauty of Catholic thought. Mm-hmm. You know, and not just Catholic thought. I mean, so many things. The art. I have this idea in the future. Maybe someday I'll study Catholic art in the Middle Ages, because there's so much there. Music, everything.
It's actually art. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so gorgeous. Unlike so much of the stuff you get today.
Yeah.
It's so reminiscent of the thought, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's depth, there's detail. Everything means something. And it breaks my heart when I hear people leaving the faith or walking away from the faith because they weren't engaged, because they didn't learn about the beauty and the depth of the thought, and they see it just as this surfacey superstition that can be tossed aside so easily.
Yeah, I'm with you there, man. It's devastating. It happened to me when I was young. It happened to me. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So what are you doing about that, and what do you propose to people? Because I think, I think people understand it, especially parents. They understand it.
Yep.
So yeah, I threw two questions out there. Like what do you see yourself doing in that role to try and strengthen the faith of the youth? And then what would your advice be to other people who are listening to this who might be in a position of influence? What could they do?
Right. Well, I'm writing these books. The first book that En Route Books published is called The Wise Guy, or not, sorry, is called A Fool's Errand, which I wrote specifically as an introduction to philosophy for our young Catholics. Because I was probably actually about a year and a half ago now, what was it? Yeah, where I was talking with my wife, and I was saying the same thing, like how much it breaks my heart to hear people leave the faith and the depth and the beauty of the philosophy. And she's like, well, you should write a book for young Catholics. I was like, okay, good idea. And I had a draft written within 10 days.
Beautiful.
As a teacher,
that's passion. That's passion.
Yeah. I mean, and I interact with my students. I talk about philosophy a lot with them. It's a public school, but we do talk about philosophy. And so I already knew in my head, I framed out pretty quickly how it was going to go, what I wanted to write. I have the YouTube channel that I do sporadically. I get to do a bunch of videos or not. Right now I'm slowly working on a series, which is a critique of Dawkins's The God Delusion. That kind of thing. Cause I had heard someone say something about how he had heard some Catholic kids reading that book and then tossing aside their faith.
Yeah, it's really a shame, especially if they're going to toss away on such a bad book.
I know, it's awful. It's really, really terrible. The philosophy, or the lack thereof, I should say.
Yes, it's true. So, you mentioned something interesting. I kind of like that, right? Because there's probably a number of people who are going to be listening to this. They're devout, they're Catholic, and maybe they are teachers, but they're at a public school. So, it's probably not. Might be generally frowned upon to go into a physics class and start, preaching, right, or talking about the Eucharist or something like that, right? You might get brought down to the superintendent's office yourself. Yeah. But if you just start teaching sound philosophy, right, that's smart. That's kind of an underhanded evangelization in a way, because you get people thinking right, you get them thinking straight. Well, then they're going to be shielded if they come across the garbage that is the God delusion, for one. Right. But then they'll be able to weigh arguments fairly. And yeah, I like where you're going with that. Is that intentional?
It was, yes. Yeah, it is intentional. The idea is to try to challenge my students to think critically at that higher level, because they're taught the subjects, but they're taught all this content. But the information, no accumulation of information is the same thing as wisdom and critical thinking. And it breaks my heart also that students don't learn philosophy. There is no class in philosophy. That if there's any subject that should be required, it's philosophy, because that's the thing that helps to connect and all the other disciplines that they're learning.
Yeah, it really is amazing how that has just completely fallen away. Even logic. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you'll learn math, but nobody's reading Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft, and that should be a basic textbook in every high school.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh man, well, Matt, I appreciate the work you're doing. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes here to tell people where they can pick up a copy of both of your books, the names of them one more time, and how they can also keep in contact with you, what the best places are to find you online, all the good stuff. Give it to us.
Okay, all right. So both books can be found at En Route Books and Media, and they're sold on Amazon.com, both as ebook and in print format. One of them is A Fool's Errand. That's the brief, informal introduction to philosophy for young Catholics. And then this other one, The Wise Guy and the Fool. And I recorded as an audiobook, A Fool's Errand, and I think that'll be coming out soon, submitted to the publisher, and they're working on getting it out in the audiobook format for the audience who doesn't necessarily read, but they might listen to an audiobook. I have the YouTube channel is Donec Requiescat, which of course is difficult to spell, but it's the Latin version of from the phrase our heart is restless until it rests is Donec Requiescat. But if they if they go to the En Route Books and Media page for the books, my YouTube videos, some of them are linked there. I also have a Facebook page called A Fool on an Errand, based on the title of the first book. And then another one that I do for young kids. My family and I, my wife and I have 7 kids, 4 adopted, 3 biological.
Oh, wow.
And we do weekly gospel readings and reflections for kids. And
That's
the name
awesome.
of that one is Mr. D 418, MISTRD 418.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, we will link all that in the show notes just to make access a little bit easier for everybody. Matt, thank you so much, and I hope we can have a part 2 here soon.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for your work.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.